Welcome, Cyndi, to my YouTube channel. Cyndi and I met around 2 years ago through the Empowered Ex Jehovah's Witness Facebook group. And I have not yet to hear her full story. I just know that we just had a really good conversation the first time we met, and we've talked a couple times here and there, and her and I work as coaches, both of us. So we had so much things to talk about. And I will just hand the microphone over to you, Cyndi. So if you can tell us how the Jehovah's Witnesses came into your life and your story as a witness and how you left the organization, and you can go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to see you again. Um, I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness from, I guess, about the age of 2. So I don't have any memory of not being a Jehovah's Witness. Um, Someone knocked on my parents' door and they were hooked from that encounter at the door. Um, my father became an elder and we traveled a lot to where the need was greater. Um, so we spent most of my life growing up in Iowa in a small rural town of about 450 people. So the congregation was really small. So I didn't have a lot of outside exposure to people. And the group that I had to associate with was really small. My high school class and the class I went from like fourth grade through 12th grade was only like 38 people. So that kind of gives you an idea of how small the circle was in the community. And then the Jehovah's Witness circle was even smaller. Um, so my life was pretty much like everybody else's, where you don't have the holidays, you don't have birthdays, and you go to the meetings and you study, and your life is very structured, and it seems very normal until you get to probably like junior high. And then people are like, why can't you do this? And why can't you do that? And you can't play sports and you can't be in the drama and you can't do the things that most teenage kids do. You don't dress very similar to the way the teenagers are dressing. You don't listen to the same music generally. Um, and they start to question things. So I had a friend that was not a Jehovah's Witness that rode the school bus with me. And he was my neighbor. So we spent probably a half hour every day on the school bus. And he started to ask me questions and about why I couldn't do certain things. And if your life was like mine, if you asked why you couldn't do certain things, the answer generally was, well, because Jehovah says we can't. And they never really give you a full answer. They just say, well, because you're not supposed to. Jehovah doesn't approve of that. So my response would be similar to most people I've talked to when they were asked why they can't do it. Well, because I'm a Jehovah's Witness and we don't believe in that. Well, most of the time people would just say, okay, but not my friend. My friend was like, well, I don't understand. Why don't they believe that way? And so I would give them some generic answer and he would just kind of like keep poking and keep poking. And so I would go back and ask, well, why? Why do we not believe in that? Or why? People are asking me and I want to give them an answer and I don't know how to give them the answer. Well, my friend never gave up because I guess he could tell that I was being held back and he didn't like that. And he wanted me to become somebody different. He felt really bad for me. I know this now because we've reconnected as adults after many, many years. We found each other on Facebook and we have had very many conversations about this. And he's like, I just knew I had to get you out of that. It was so awful. The turning point for me, though, was when I was in high school, probably about 10th grade. We got a new teacher, and he was our student counselor, and he also taught psychology. And I was very interested in taking psychology, and it took me about a year to sign up for psychology because every time I brought it up, my dad would shoot it down about why I shouldn't be taking a psychology class at school. And so by the time I got into my junior year, I was on track to graduate early. And so I was like, well, I need this extra credit and there's no other classes that I can take to get that credit. And I really want to get out early. Um, because I might want an auxiliary pioneer. I really didn't want an auxiliary pioneer, but I was trying to come up with a reason why I could get out early. And in order to get out early, I had to take the psychology class. So I got into the psychology class, which was so amazing to me because they were teaching critical thinking skills. They were talking about things that I had never heard of. And as I just stated earlier, my class was 38 people. So the teachers got to know you individually very well, and everybody knew I was a Jehovah's Witness because there was probably only four other kids, other than me and my sister, that were Jehovah's Witnesses. They all knew who we were. To add a little layer to that, my dad, who was an elder, worked at a school. He was the maintenance slash janitorial person. So I didn't even get away from his watchful eye when I was at school. Most Jehovah's Witness kids can go to school and not have to be watched. But my dad followed me around to make sure I was doing what I was supposed to do. Um, but I really liked this guy and I really liked what he was teaching. So I used to take my study hall time and go to his counseling office. And I would talk to him about things and he would ask me questions. And he would like banter back and forth with me when I would give him the answers. And that kind of started my journey of this doesn't really resonate with me and I really want to get out. By the time I was able to drive and I got a job outside of the community that I lived with, um, I started to see more of what normal people did. And I met another person that wasn't a Jehovah's Witness that I started to see outside, kind of like dating a little bit secretly. I started kind of living a double life and I got caught and I got in trouble. And so I had to meet with the elders and I had to talk to them. Like most young women who have had a sexual experience before they were married and had to sit in front of the elders, it's not comfortable. They ask a lot of leading questions and they ask a lot of what I know now is inappropriate questions that should never be done. And it almost brings about a feeling of shame about your body and about sexuality that stays with you long after you might leave the organization. And that is something that I could talk about later about how that, how that affects your life going forward if you don't recognize and face that. So after I graduated high school, I wanted to just get away. So I moved out of state with some friends that were Jehovah's Witnesses in Tennessee because I was planning my escape. I wanted out, and I knew if I stayed close to my parents, that wasn't going to happen. So I moved in with this family until I could find a job and then moved out on my own. And when I
And
moved
how old
out,
were you at this? I'm sorry, how
probably
old were you at this point?
about 18 or
Right
19.
after high school.
Right after high school, I got away because by that time I knew I couldn't do it anymore.
And were you baptized?
Yes, I was baptized at about 14. It
Okay.
just
And then
was the
did you,
natural progression.
yeah,
It's just the progression. Everybody does it. So when you get to be about that age, you just do it. It's the next step.
right. Did you get privately reproved then when you were with that guy? Okay.
Yes.
And then it,
I think there was an actual public reproof. You know, and that was embarrassing too, to have to sit through that announcement that you were publicly reproved. Um, but that was, I think that experience solidified in my mind, I can't stay here. I can't do this anymore. And my eyes had been opened of other possibilities by my friend and by my student counselor, and then witnessing what other people were doing when I got my job. And I just was like, I need to explore this. I need to see what else is out there. So I moved to Tennessee in with a family who was friends with my parents, got my own place eventually because I met three other girls through my job that weren't Jehovah's Witnesses who needed another roommate because they were college students. That was my way out. So I was working, I was with these other girls, I was starting to live a life separate from the Jehovah's Witnesses. I kind of became very sporadic at the meetings. my parents got messages from our friends that that was happening. They moved from Iowa to Tennessee to be close to where I was, of course. So in their minds, they had to move there to save me, I guess. I don't know what else to say about that, but they moved all the way across the country. Um, I was dating somebody who was not a Jehovah's Witness, and where I was working, there was another Jehovah's Witness person that worked at the same place I did. And he told on me, and I had yet another conversation with the elders about my behavior, um, about my sexuality outside of marriage, about associating with people who weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. And I just basically said, I don't buy into this anymore. I don't believe it. So they then told me that they were going to disfellowship me if I did not repent and decide to come back. And I just said, well, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. What I was told at that time was the disassociation was something new in the organization. And what I had been told by the elders was if I went ahead and disassociated myself, then my parents would not have to shun me. The rest of the organization would, but your family did not have to. That's what I was told. Now, I'm about 19 at this time. So the biggest fear for most of us is losing that family connection. I was 19. I still loved my parents, even though I didn't agree with them. And we had a dysfunctional, abusive family. I still loved my parents. So I was like, okay, well, if those are my options, why not? So I wrote the letter and I handed it to them. Less than a day later, my dad called me and said, what? Why did you do that? And I told him everything that they said. And he's like, well, that's not true. Like, what do you mean it's not true? And he goes, well, why didn't you ask me first before you wrote the letter? And I was like, well, why would it have even occurred to me to question the elders? To even think I had to go to my dad to ask the validity of something they were saying, because I was still in that mindset that whatever the elders tell you is true. So I didn't think to question it. So I told him that. I'm like, well, what? Are you telling me they lied to me? And he's like, well, I don't think they lied. I think they just didn't have a full understanding. And I'm like, okay, well, if I didn't write the letter, they were going to disfellowship me. So would it have mattered either way? And he's like, no, I suppose not. And I'm like, well, and I'm thinking to myself, then why are we having this conversation? Because if you have to shun me regardless, what difference does it make? In retrospect, if I knew, I wouldn't have written the letter of disassociation. And when people ask an opinion about should you fade, should you disassociate, should you let them disfellowship you, that's a very individual decision based on a lot of circumstances. But from my experience, I would not do it again because all that did was give them a lot of ammunition to come back to me and say, you are the one that did this. If you hadn't written the letter. Now, in reality, whether I wrote the letter or not, they were going to make the same decision because the choice to shun is theirs. I don't ask them to shun. I don't treat them with shunning. Um, I don't think anyone who's left ever reverse shuns, right? We don't choose that. We just want to live our own life. We want them to live their own life. And let's just not talk about religion or politics, right? Just live your life. So for me, if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't disassociate. And the reasoning for me is not just that fact that it gives them that ammunition, but for me, it's about playing their game. I don't have to do anything. If I choose to not be a Jehovah's Witness anymore, I'm just going to stop going and I'm going to live my life the way I choose. And that should be all there is to it. I mean, if you decide to become Catholic, which I did after I left the Jehovah's Witnesses years later, I became Catholic. when I decided that didn't work for me anymore and I stopped being Catholic, I didn't have to disassociate myself. I didn't get excommunicated. People didn't come in and talk to me. No one is shunning me. I still have friends from that church that I went to. And it was simple. I just decided this doesn't feel right anymore. I'm not going. And that's how it should be. So I don't want to follow their rules or play their games or have them decide what's good for me. So whenever anybody asks me, that's my opinion. And I realize that everybody has their own individual circumstance. So what they choose to do has to be right for the situation they're in. And I respect whatever decision that they make. And I will help support them through the consequences of those choices. Because in reality, there's always, no matter how we choose to lead, there's always going to be fallout that we have to navigate. But what choice you make and how you leave is very personal, and there is no right or wrong way. Just get out. That's the right thing to do. Get out, and we'll deal with the fallout later. So that's how I was ended up being disassociated.
Such great advice because I think that a lot of people, yeah, like you said, they want to know what is the best thing. And like you said, there's no best thing. Like everyone has their own path. And in all honesty, if you didn't write that letter, like you said, you would have gotten disfellowshipped, and that might have led you into a different direction in your life. So it all worked out, and you're
Mhm.
here now. So that was, you said, when you were about 18 or so years old. And then what happened to your family? Your dad was still an elder, and do you have siblings? I don't know if you really went into that.
I have one
Oh,
sibling who I don't
okay.
have contact with either. She eventually just pretty much faded. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I have no contact with her due to other
Okay.
reasons. She suffered a lot of mental and emotional trauma um, in and out of the organization um, because of the dysfunction that happened in the family. So I really don't have connection with her, but yes, I have one sister.
Okay, so take us back to that point where you ended up leaving and disassociating yourself at 18. You then moved out of home. And what happened to the communication with your family and your old friends? And what was your life like after you made that decision and moved out?
Yeah, so again, I was only about 19. So I didn't know a lot. I didn't have a lot of tools, right? So I was working as a waitress, um, living with some other girls that were going to college. And I would run into my parents a lot because I lived in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is outside of Nashville. Not a huge town, but much bigger than the one that I grew up in. Um, and because I would run into my parents a lot because they lived in the same town or community, and my mom would just drop by with such a guilt trip, and she would cry all the time and beg me to come back because I've destroyed the family and how could I do this to them? And, it was always about what I did. And it was becoming so emotional for me to deal with that I just felt like I had to leave again. So one of my roommates had an aunt that lived in Huntsville, Alabama, and she was going to move down there. And she had a friend that worked at a GTE telephone factory down in Huntsville, Alabama. And she was like, if you want to come with me, my aunt said that you can live with us and we'll try and get you into the factory and we'll get you a job and you can get away from this. Because since she was my roommate, she witnessed what I was going through and she's like, you just need to get away from them. And so I moved once again to Huntsville, Alabama, and I was trying to navigate life, making poor decisions, obviously, about who to trust and dating people and um, trying to make friends and just trying to make a living pretty much trial by error, right? You just would do whatever you had to do to pay the bills. I was surviving, I wasn't living. In retrospect, I was surviving. Well, I lost my job because they laid off about 1,500 people. I had gotten into a car accident. My car was totaled. My back was hurt. Um, I felt really broken. And I kind of felt like, I don't know what to do. I give up. You know, now I don't have a job. I don't have a car. I'm hurt. What am I going to do? My grandparents, who had never been Jehovah's Witness, let me move to Chicago to stay with them. They lived in a Chicago suburb. And I didn't really know my grandparents very well. We would go and visit them maybe once a year or once every other year. As witnesses, we would go back and visit my mom's family. So I only knew them from those visits. And I was a little unsure whether they would take me in. I thought they would, but I thought I might as well ask because the other option was going back with my parents. And for me, that was not an option. So I called them and I didn't even really know if they knew I had left the organization because I never had that conversation with them. I was pretty sure my mom did, but I wasn't sure. So I called them and told them what happened. And I said, listen, I need a place to stay. I will find a job and I will pay you, but I just need somewhere to go. And they were so loving and so welcoming, and they took me in, and they became like my parents to me from that moment on. And they gave me a safe place to land without a lot of judgment. Um, we did have some conversations about what happened, and my grandparents had told me that they were never really happy that my parents became Jehovah's Witnesses. And I guess they had had some heated discussions with my dad about when my sister and I became of age, would they allow us the freedom to make the choice that what we wanted to do? And he had always said, well, sure, but I know they're going to want to stay in because we have the truth. And they have been raised to understand that. So my kids won't leave. Well, we both did. So, shocker, we both did. But my grandparents gave me that space. And I remember it being a struggle. I mean, I found a job and I was working and I paid my grandparents and I got a car, but I didn't feel like I was navigating things. And I was still struggling because my parents would still try to pull me back in. And I was struggling because my counter argument to them was the elders lied to me and you can't recognize that they lied to them. So why are you being so hard on me? If they lied to me, why can't you just let me be what I want to be and just love me? Why can't you just love me for being your daughter? Like you love your mother, you still have association with your mom and dad. And I had two aunts. I'm like, you still talk to them. Why can't I just be like them to you? And they were like, well, they never knew Jehovah. They never were baptized. You got baptized. I'm like, at 14, I didn't. So there was this constant banter back and forth. And it was becoming very depressing for me because I couldn't find my direction in life. I didn't even know how to begin. And so at the age of 20, I tried to overdose to kill myself. I tried to commit suicide because I was done. I I had tried to date people, I tried to have relationships, and I was so dysfunctional in my thinking and didn't even know how to behave um, when it came to normal, what most people called normal. I experimented with different religions and nothing really felt like it clicked. I felt like there was this strong connection to something bigger than myself, but I didn't know what it was and I didn't know how to find it. And frankly, I was tired. I felt beat up emotionally. Um, I was struggling financially and I just wanted the pain to go away. I wanted the guilt and the shame and the anger and the resentment all to go away. And I wasn't successful in figuring that out. So by that time I got to be 20, I didn't want to live anymore. Um, After I took all of the pills that I took, I started to think about, did I really want to die? And then I was like, well, not really, not really. And so I went and told a friend what had happened. He was a friend who I knew was a paramedic. So I went to him thinking, oh, he's going to know what to do. So he got me to the hospital, and they were able to counteract all of the medication that I took. And obviously, I lived through that. But because I had been working, I had insurance. And so back then, anyone that attempts to commit suicide, enroll them into a program that is a behavioral health program. And so I entered that program at the hospital. And that opened my eyes to the world of counseling. And I remembered my friend that was my student counselor and the psychology stuff that he taught me. And one of the things that they taught in that behavioral health program was what I now know as meditation and breathing exercises and going within and just quieting your mind. Um, and so my parents came to visit me at the hospital. And I thought to myself, wow, maybe they do really care about me. Maybe that's all it took. And then, yet once again, when I met with them, that was just one more opportunity for my dad to say, well, I told you this would happen if you left Jehovah. And so are you ready to admit that you made a mistake, and are you willing to come back now? Because if you don't, it's not going to get better. There was no concern about my mental health or why I got that distraught. There was no accepting responsibility for any of the role that the Jehovah's Witnesses shunning or them or anything that they did. There was none of that, none. And just an opportunity for them to say, are you coming back? And when I said no, they got up and left. And that was it. There was nothing. They left me with my grandparents at that point. And so I did some intensive therapy, found a job, and just kind of at that point, it was still, you know, going through the motions of living a new life. And I got into a rhythm of got a job. I focused mostly on my family that was there, my grandparents, my two aunts, and a small circle of friends. And I went to work every day. And, you know, I got a car, I started to be able to buy nicer clothes. I was able to move out on my own. And so life had become a little easier because I had routines. It was, I was doing what everybody else was doing, so I felt like it was normal. I I met a man that I eventually married and had two children with. Um, Became Catholic. His family was Catholic. I had started studying Catholicism before I met him, and it really felt good to me because there was tradition and ceremony and ancient roots, and it just resonated with me. And what a lot of people who are Catholic find amusing is that coming from the world of being a Jehovah's Witness and stepping into the Catholic faith, I felt freer as a Catholic than I did as a Jehovah's Witness. And most people who are Catholic find it very constraining. And so they think that that's kind of funny. I didn't necessarily agree with everything that they taught, but I loved the tradition. I loved the ceremony. I loved all the pomp and circumstance of the Catholic Church. So I raised my children Catholic. I sent them to Catholic school. I gave them that background. We volunteered for a lot of charity events that they did. My kids played sports there. I felt like I was giving them a good religious foundation with lots of friends. They got to do everything I didn't get to do. They got to play sports. They were in scouts. They did whatever they wanted. They got to do. So I kind of felt like I was giving them a really good foundation. I never ever told them they had to stay Catholic, and neither one of my kids go to the Catholic Church anymore. And I don't shun them because it's up to them. I don't go to the Catholic Church anymore. It doesn't resonate for me anymore. But for a great period of time, I found comfort in that. So again, what works for some may not work for others. And as I talk to other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, some of them do find another organized religious path to follow. Some of them don't. Some of them become atheists. Some of them become agnostic. And all of that is okay because all of it is part of your path. And for whatever reason, becoming Catholic worked for me for that time. It gave me that sense of community that I felt like I had lost. It gave me structure. It gave me a connection with a higher power. Um, so it worked for me. Unfortunately, I got divorced when my kids were 1 and 3. I got divorced. So I raised my kids by myself um, at that point. Um, I got a corporate job. I've worked in corporate America for like 30 years. I worked for big name companies like Stone Container Corporation. I worked for MetLife. My last job was 15 years with JP Morgan Chase, managing their Chicago headquarters. And I was very fortunate to have jobs like that because it opened up a world of personal development. Because part of those jobs were taking leadership classes, taking team training, um, thinking about how to be inclusive and think outside the box. And yet it gave me a very good income, a lot of benefits, good health insurance so that I could pursue some more counseling that I wanted, and learning things about the bigger world outside of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And in an organization, there's a lot of structure. Part of the part of the Jehovah's Witness training, though, and mindset made it difficult for me to advance in my job because I didn't always trust myself or trust that I knew the right answers. I didn't always want to speak up. And I always wanted to please who my boss was because in the industry that I worked in, it was male dominated industry at that time. And so I never felt like I was their equal. Even though they felt like that, they were very open to me and they were very accommodating and trying to push me to do better. I always defaulted to, I wanted to please them. I couldn't speak up. I didn't think my ideas held much weight. And I felt subordinate to the men. And so that was a struggle for me. Um, my son, I need to backtrack a little bit so that you understand. When my son was in high school, um, he started hanging out with the wrong group of kids and became addicted to opioids. And so my son progressed from taking opioids into a full-blown heroin addiction. And so I was struggling with um, dealing with my own stuff and dealing with a child in addiction. And their father was not much help because I was in an abusive relationship before I divorced him, um, physically and mentally abused. My son was mentally abused by his father, at a young age and was pretty much abandoned. The dad didn't have much to do with them. So my son was feeling abandonment issues and a lot of self-worth. So he was going through addiction problems. And not long after that, my daughter left to go to college. So I became a single mom with no kids in the house. One child in New Orleans, going to school in New Orleans, and my son with a full blown heroin addiction. And so I became very depressed, even though I had this great job and I had gone through all the counseling and I had gone through all these leadership training, development classes. I went to some community college over the years, studied business, studied transportation, um, took psychology classes, got certified in a bunch of stuff. I felt like my life was falling apart again. And I remember sitting on that couch thinking, I've done so much work. What is missing? Why is this happening again? And I was on Facebook one day because I was just at home not knowing what to do. And I'm scrolling through Facebook. And one of the guys that went to the congregation in Iowa when I was a kid showed up on my Facebook page as someone I might know. And so I reached out to him. And Little did I know he left at the same time I did, but I had moved away, so I didn't know. We had lost track of each other. So he said to me, I have really been watching some of these videos about the Jehovah's Witnesses. I want to share them with you. Well, I was never one of those people that watched all of those videos about, people get in that cycle, right? Of watching video after video after video. And I'm like, I don't really identify with that organization anymore. And I really try not to think about it. What I had done is I compartmentalized, right? I didn't deal with a lot of it. I compartmentalized. I had taken that part of my life and put it in a drawer, closed the drawer, and locked it. So I said, I don't want to watch the videos because I don't want to open up Pandora's box. I kind of felt like my life had gotten somewhat normal, even though there was some conflict and chaos going on. I didn't want to compound the chaos by opening up the Jehovah's Witness box. He's like, well, no, can you just, there's this one, can you put, and he really insisted. So I watched it. I didn't really care about watching anymore, but something amazing happened because I watched that one video. Anybody who watches YouTube videos knows that if you watch a video, they're going to send you from their algorithm other videos that they're going to recommend. Whose video popped up? Rodney Allgood, who started the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses group. One of his videos popped up in my newsfeed and said, this might be someone that you want to listen to. And for some reason, I was curious and I clicked on that. I don't know why, because I had no interest in watching any more Jehovah's Witness videos. But for some reason, I clicked on that video. And anybody who knows Rodney Allgood knows that Rodney is full of positivity and full of wonderful suggestions on how to overcome the programming of the Jehovah's Witnesses. So I watched a couple other of his videos and I'm like, I want to talk to this guy. So I looked him up on Facebook and I sent him a message. And I didn't think much about it because I thought, well, he's probably not going to respond to me. He doesn't even know who I am. But I sent him a message and he messaged me back. And we had a conversation. And I just kind of poured my heart out to him, telling him how I grew up a Jehovah's Witness, how I created this amazing life for myself. And yet I felt like I was back in the same spot, feeling alone, feeling hopeless, feeling like I wasn't worthy. I was questioning whether I was a good parent because I had this child in addiction. And of course, it had to be my fault. It couldn't be anybody else's fault. It had to be my fault. My marriage fell apart and I was blaming myself in that. So I went through his boot camp. And some of the tips in that boot camp led me down a deeper path of personal development and self-discovery. And I started changing the way I started my day. I started journaling. I started having an open mind about new things, ways of thinking. And I just changed little habits every day, starting my day more with intention and purpose and positivity and adding new things to my life that kind of put me in charge of the direction that my life was going in. Instead of allowing things to push me, I was leading myself and I was making choices of positivity. And that led me down a path of meditation and spirituality and becoming authentically who I am and learning to trust myself and find that little bit of courage. And because of who I was listening to, I listened to people like Wayne Dyer and Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza and Greg Braden. They talked a lot about being connected to your heart and knowing the intuition and the knowledge of the heart and the brain of the heart. And I started listening to them and reading their books, which Greg Braden talks a lot about heart math and heart brain coherence. and understanding your emotions and how important is that. And I'm like, what is heart math? What is he talking about? I got to find that out. So I did a Google search for heart math and really became enthralled in some of the things that they have discovered through their research out in California. They've done like 25 years of science about the science of the heart and how that affects your body physiologically and helps you connect to that inner knowing. And so I liked it so much that I took some classes from heart math and I've become certified as a heart math trainer and teacher. And it really turned my life around. So I think that was the piece that was missing for me was that deeper personal awareness because the counselors only got me so far because they didn't understand. They didn't understand. This was like 25 years ago, right? That I started with counselors and half of them didn't know who Jehovah's Witnesses were. They didn't understand narcissistic behavior or mind control religion. And even if they didn't understand the intricacies of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They just had like an umbrella knowledge of religious organizations. And it was almost like they had a one size fits all, and it doesn't. I mean, anybody who has watched the Leah Remini program on Netflix about the Scientology, or many people who follow Rodney's group have talked to or heard Wendy Jensen, who is a former LDS member, and she has a group for LDS like Rodney has for Jehovah's Witnesses. And it is not a one size fits all. Yes, they all have similarities, but there are differences. And unless you understand those differences, I think you can only help people get so far. So I think that's where finding a community of people who get you and understand you and support you and reaching out to those people and understanding what it truly means when you say it takes a village. Well, finding your own village, finding your own tribe of people that get you and support you and show you love and understanding and allow you that place of growth, um, that's that's been very helpful. And actually, because of that, that's how I met my current husband. Is he went down that same path. He was raised a Jehovah's Witness. He left about the same age that I left. He went into the Navy and became a submariner during 9/11. Um, got out of the Navy. He's a firefighter paramedic, but he went down the same path of self-discovery. He's a meditation guide. He practices Reiki. Um, he has an open mind about things, and he's really supported me in that growth and finding that right partner for you, someone who doesn't own you or, you know, has dominance over you, but truly understands and loves you for who you are. Just we just continue to grow together because we have that understanding and that common background. So it's really been an up and down journey for me, but the last probably 7 years has been significant because I have taken that time to do the personal inner work and getting to know who I am and getting to love and trust myself and be grounded in my beliefs and knowing that I can be whoever I want. And my path might be the same as yours, it might be different than yours, but whatever your path is okay. And there's no judgment. Your own self judgment and yourself, what you think of yourself and your self love is most important.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. I was echoing for a second. I'm so curious. You mentioned also that your son, how's the situation around the your son and how is he doing now?
Um, my son went through several years of the addiction and came out the other side. He finally got the help that he needed and he became sober. He actually became a counselor for people in addiction. He made a lot of progress. Recently, he is struggling again. Different substance. He had some things happen. He's lost his job. Some other issues came up, and he's struggling right now with some alcohol issues, but he's working through them. And because of what I do and my understanding of this, I'm able to help him and guide him and not enable him. For me, one of the hardest things to do, I'm glad you asked me this because this is really important for other people who may have family members in addiction, because this happens so much to people who are leaving, right? The Jehovah's Witnesses is they find themselves so emotionally distraught that they turn to substance abuse or attempt suicide. For me, experiencing the shunning from the Jehovah's Witnesses, when my son was going through his addiction, I had a hard time distinguishing tough love from shunning, because I had told myself that no matter what my children did, I would never shun them. I would never not love them, and I would never leave them. And so because of that, I enabled him, which did not help him. And I actually went to some counselors specific to people in addiction so that I could understand how addiction worked and how I could work through that thought process that was playing in my head so that I didn't enable him. And so now I've learned how to do that. I've also learned how to work the system in America related to addiction and help with addiction. Um, and so I do a lot of work with families of people in addiction because I think that is so important. A lot of the Naranon meetings or Al-Anon meetings that I went to didn't offer a lot of hope. It was just, teaching you to not enable them, but they were pretty much preparing you for the fact that your loved one might not make it through this addiction, and you need to prepare yourself for, protect yourself from that. So I didn't really go to those anymore, and I started helping people on my own find a place of love and hope for their loved one. The harsh reality is a lot of people don't make it through to the other side, but just distinguishing that tough love from shunning was key for me because I wasn't helping him because I didn't want to shun, and I viewed tough love as shunning. So I just wanted to make that distinction. I'm able to help him from a place of love and understanding without supporting his habit. So
I totally understand, especially because your parents kind of abandoned you after you left the organization. So I completely understand you don't want to do the same thing for your son. Cyndi, thank you so much for sharing your story and what a story it was of how you transitioned from when you left the organization to now when you found the Catholic religion. It's interesting because I was born Catholic and my mom became a Jehovah's Witness, but that's like a whole nother story. Um,
right.
I love the fact that you kept on saying too that everyone has a different path for everything from the disassociation and fading into finding a religion into spirituality. So I just want to say thank you so much, Cyndi, for sharing your story. Is there anything that you'd like to add and finish off this interview that you want to say to anyone, or you want to share anything that you feel like you want to add to this interview?
I just wanted to let people know if, hearing other people's stories and listening to, um, it's the same but different, right? We all grew up in the same mind control, but everybody's story is a little different, and everybody's path out is a little different. I just want you to know that there is hope. What they tell you about you're not going to make it, it's going to be too tough, and you'll end up coming back. It doesn't have to happen to you. And one of the other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses I know that you've interviewed is Jack Gray. He has supported Rodney in the group. He and I come to the conferences and tell our stories at the conferences. But I was very fortunate to join Jack as one of the authors of Fear to Freedom. This is still available on Amazon, I believe. If not, there's a Fear to Freedom link that you have put on your interview with Jack. Maybe you could slip that on this one. Because this book has 16 people that have shared their stories. And so, there are a few people who even were not Jehovah's Witnesses, but came from different faiths that also are mind control. It doesn't take long to read the stories because we were limited to 10,000 uh, words or less. So you have to really consolidate your story. But I'm chapter two, and I think you can read the chapters in about 15 minutes. But I think that you would be very inspired to hear other people's story. You're going to resonate with one of them. And what I have known about all these authors is that they are so genuine and so authentic, and they just want to help. And so they are very open to having people connect with them through the ex-Jehovah's Witness group or, private message. And all of us just want to help people find their own beautiful story and their own life of creating your life to be whatever you want. And as a heart math certified trainer, I think it's really important for us as Jehovah's Witnesses to understand our emotions, because we were really never taught to understand emotions. We were just taught to do and think um, what we were told and not to pay attention to our own thoughts or emotions. And so, if anyone is interested in how you can learn some of the heart math techniques, you can go to heartmath.com, and I recommend this book, The Heart Intelligence. They also have a new book called The Heart Math Solution, and it is not expensive. I think the books are about $15. I think right now they actually have a discount of 30% on Heart Intelligence. Um, I would recommend that you read the book. There's science behind it. It's not just, some woo-woo stuff that people practice somewhere in another part of the world that you don't understand. It's very easy to understand. It's very interesting. And I think that it could help you understand finding a path for you and listening and trusting your own inner knowledge, your own intuition, and your own guidance, because that's really what the key is to healing the trauma, is finding what's true for you.
You are so right, Cyndi. So thank you so much for sharing those two books. I'm going to actually add the link to both of those websites in the description. And again, thank you so much for sharing your story with me. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video, and thanks again for